The Convent. After high school, I got my CNA certification. The only jobs that were really available in our small town were a mental hospital and a convent. I chose the convent as it seemed like the safest option, or so I thought. But before I get too far ahead of myself, let me start at the beginning. Other than the long hours, it seemed like a great job at first. I liked my bosses, I liked my coworkers, I even liked the nuns. But the longer I worked there, the more I found there was a pretty dark history behind not only the convent, but the church as well. You see, just down the hill from the convent was St. Joseph's Catholic Church. Many of the residents of the convent were nuns there. The oldest resident, Dorothy, had been a nun there since she was 19 years old. She was now pushing 102. She'd become one of my favorite nuns. We would often talk for hours on end. She had so many stories and seen so many things. She was absolutely fascinating. Sadly, her health started to decline a few months after I started. One day, after I finished checking her vitals, she grabbed my hand tightly. She tried her best to pull me in close. "I don't want to die," she whispered. I knelt down beside her. "You're not going to die, Dorothy. You've got so many more years left," I said, holding her hand. "I don't," she whispered back. "The devil is already here, and he's waiting for me." At first I thought she had misspoke. "The devil? You mean God?" I asked. "No," she said. "The devil. He's right there by the window. He's been there for days. He's with the children. My children." I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up as I slowly turned to face the window. But there was nothing there. Nothing but the dreary October sky outside. "Dorothy, there's no one there," I said, my voice shaking. "And you didn't have any children." Dorothy then pulled me in closer. "I did. Father Wilson's. He took them to the river. All of them. I can still hear them crying. Listen for them. Listen for the crying children. Go to the oak tree and listen." I could feel my heart racing as I stood up. Dorothy fell into a coughing fit before her eyes closed and she fell asleep. I slowly stepped out of the room, my eyes fixated on the window. The minute I was clear of the door frame, I bolted down the stairs to the break room. I didn't tell a soul what Dorothy said. I just sat at the table, staring out the break room window, sipping on my coffee. As I turned to grab the coffee pot, I spotted a picture on the wall. It was a photograph of a scary-looking man. He was bald with thin, wiry eyebrows that were turned downward in an angry glare. His face was thin, showing off his sharp bone structure beneath. His eyes were dark, almost black. Honestly, I don't know how I ever noticed this picture before. Truth be told, I rarely came into the break room. I never had time. But even though I had never seen this photograph before, I knew almost instantly who it was. I looked at the plaque below. Father Arthur Wilson. One of my coworkers, Tammy, came into the room. "Well, look at you. I've never seen you in here. Drinking coffee, too," she said, putting her lunchbox down on the table. I didn't say a word. I couldn't take my eyes off Father Wilson. Creepy, isn't he? I hated working here when he was still alive. He was a horrible man, she said. I was finally able to break free from the picture and turned to Tammy. "You met him?" I asked. Father Wilson? Oh yeah. He lived to be like 110 years old or something like that. Worked until the day he died, too. People said he was a blessed man. I think he was just too scared to die. Why do you say that? I asked, taking a seat next to her. Tammy looked around before leaning in closer. Rumor is, he impregnated like a dozen nuns over the years. He made them keep the pregnancies a secret. The minute the children were born, he took them to the river, I said, finishing her sentence. Yep, so you've heard it too, she asked. After work that night, instead of heading to my car, I made my way down to the river. I wasn't sure where this surge of bravery came from. Curiosity, maybe? I got to the large oak tree that sat along the banks of the river. I stood next to it and listened. Nothing. As I was about to turn to leave, I heard it. Crying. It was coming from the river. I whipped my head back around and stared at the bank of the river, but no one was in sight. As I stepped closer, the crying intensified. And it wasn't the sound of just one baby crying. It was multiple babies. Dozens of babies. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes as the crying finally reached a crescendo and ended. I felt completely drained as I turned around and headed back up the hill. I looked up at the convent and noticed a solitary window was lit. Standing in the window was Dorothy. My heart froze as I watched a dark, featureless shadow appear behind her, and then the lights flickered off. I ran up the hill and into the convent. I nearly knocked over Tammy, who was on her way out. "What's going on?" she asked. "Dorothy?" "Something's wrong with Dorothy," I shouted. We both sprinted up the stairs. We reached Dorothy's room and flipped on the light switch. Dorothy was lying in her bed. She looked as though she hadn't moved since I last left her, but she was now ghostly white, her mouth wide open. I walked over to her slowly and placed my fingers on her neck. No heartbeat. She was gone. I stared down at her face. It wasn't a face of peace or calm. It was a face of fear, terror. And I know what she was terrified of. And it wouldn't be the last time I'd encounter it. The Man in the Rain. It was not me, it was my father. He was in a van going to a church function somewhere in Iowa. They were traveling down the highway when they saw a guy walking down the road, and the youth pastor decided to pick him up since it was raining. They asked the guy where his destination was, and it was just past the town they were heading to. The rain turned into a very strong storm. It was late afternoon, and it was pitch black outside. The group kept in high spirits, singing church songs. When they were going past the town, they couldn't see anything. Shortly after passing the town in the middle of nowhere, the gentleman said, "This is my destination." Now it's still storming bad outside. The youth pastor says, "We can take you farther." The guy says, "This is where I need to be." So they stop about 2 to 3 miles past this town. The guy then asked for some money. The youth pastor felt moved to give him the 4 $100 bills in his wallet, all the money he had. The guy exits the van, and a large crack of thunder turns their heads away. They look back. There is no man there anymore. Split second, and he is gone, and the rain has just stopped. The group was shocked, so they said a prayer for the guy and went back toward town. They turned onto the exit for the town and saw the town it had been ravaged by a tornado, about when they were going past on the highway. They went into the town to immediately start helping people. Later that night, the youth pastor pulled out his wallet, and there in his wallet were 8 $100 bills.